The moon goddess grants us mates to complete our souls, but what happens when an alpha trades his soul for a throne? You learn that the bond of blood is nothing compared to the bond of vengeance. The Great Hall of Stormridge was a cathedral of gold and lightning. Jagged veins of white energy pulsed through the obsidian pillars, illuminating the thousands of highborn wolves gathered to witness the ascension of Alpha Rowan Stormridge. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and ozone, a heavy, suffocating pressure that signaled the birth of a new era. At the center of this opulence stood Rowan, his silver-threaded robes catching the light of 100 chandeliers. Beside him, Laurel, a duchess with eyes like frozen sapphires, wore a smile that was as sharp and cold as a sacrificial blade. Then there was Willow. Dragged through the center aisle by 2 hulking guards, Willow Ravencrest was a smudge of gray set on a canvas of gold. Her feet were bare, her thin servant's tunic torn and stained with the dust of the palace kitchens. The heavy iron chains around her wrists rattled with a hollow, rhythmic clank that seemed to mock the celebratory drums. Every eye in the hall was on her, some filled with pity, but most with the cruel, hungry curiosity of predators watching a wounded bird. Rowan didn't look like the man who had whispered, "You are my sanctuary," into her hair only 3 nights ago. He stood on the raised dais, his presence towering, his face a mask of sculpted stone. He looked at Willow, and for a heartbeat, she searched for a flicker of the warmth that had once stabilized his volatile power. She found nothing but the cold, crackling spark of ambition. "The council demands purity for the Stormridge throne," Rowan's voice boomed, amplified by the lightning humming in the walls. He didn't look at her as a mate, he looked at her as an obstacle. "To lead the great packs, I must purge the parasites that seek to siphon the strength of the Thunderbond." "Willow Ravencrest, you have been found guilty of siphoning royal energy for your own gain. You are a thief of the soul." Beside him, Laurel stepped forward, her hand resting possessively on Rowan's arm. She leaned in, her voice a silk-wrapped needle. "Did you really think an Omega with hollow blood could ever sit beside a King, Willow? You were a battery, nothing more. A tool to be used and discarded once the charge was spent." Rowan raised his hand, and the hall went deathly silent. "I, Rowan Stormridge, sever the tether. I reject you, Willow Ravencrest, before the pack and the gods. Your name is stricken from our scrolls. Your fate is the iron mines, where the stone will eat what little life you have left." The crowd erupted in a chorus of approval, but Willow didn't bow. She didn't weep. She pulled against the chains, forcing her guards to strain against her, and lifted her chin. Her voice was thin from exhaustion, but carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "You think you're throwing away a servant, Rowan?" she cried out, her eyes locking onto his storm-gray gaze. "You're throwing away the only heart that could ground you. You chose a crown of sparks over a soul of substance. I pray the throne is worth the fire that is about to consume you." Rowan's jaw tightened. The insult to his pride in front of the 7 kingdoms was too much. He gave a sharp, nearly imperceptible nod to the lead guard. The blow was sudden and brutal. The guard's armored gauntlet struck Willow across the temple with the force of a falling hammer. The sound of metal meeting bone echoed through the hall. Willow hit the marble floor with a sickening thud. Her world tilted, the gold and obsidian blurring into a haze of gray. She felt the cold stone against her cheek, felt the heavy silence that followed the violence. But then, something shifted. Deep within her, where she had always felt a hollow, aching void, a spark ignited. It wasn't the erratic, biting lightning of the Stormridge line. It was a low, heavy thrum, like the vibration of the earth before a mountain collapses. A gasp ripped through the room, but it didn't come from the crowd. It came from the High Healer, an ancient wolf who had seen 1,000 births and even more deaths. He rushed from the sidelines, his hands glowing with a soft, diagnostic green light. He didn't check Willow's head. His hands hovered, trembling, over her abdomen. "Stop!" the healer screamed, his voice cracking with a terror that silenced the guards. "Back away! All of you, back away!" Rowan took a step down from the dais, his brow furrowed. Healer, stay back. The rogue is carrying the true heir, the healer shrieked, falling to his knees beside Willow's unconscious form. The lightning. Alpha, it's not yours. The child, it's siphoning the palace itself. As if on cue, a sound like a thunderclap erupted from the very foundations of the castle. A jagged, terrifying crack split the marble floor, racing from Willow's broken body straight toward the throne. The massive obsidian pillars groaned as fissures snaked upward toward the ceiling, dust raining down like gray snow. The air became so thick with electricity that the highborn ladies screamed as their hair stood on end, their jewelry glowing blue with static. Willow lay in the center of the destruction, a small, still figure amidst the shattering of a kingdom. Rowan stood frozen, his hand outstretched, watching as the walls of his legacy began to crumble before he had even placed the crown on his head. Making these stories takes weeks of research, writing, and editing to get the atmosphere just right for you. If you're feeling Willow's pain right now, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It's a small gesture for you, but it's the only way we can keep telling these stories. Don't let her journey go unheard. If you were the High Healer, would you have stayed silent to protect your own life? Or would you have risked the Alpha's fury to announce the arrival of the true heir? Let me know in the comments below. The chaos of the Great Hall fades into the flickering, amber light of a memory, a time when the cracks in the palace walls were only in Willow's heart. Before she was a parasite, she was the ghost of the Stormridge Chambers. In the kingdom's hierarchy, there is no one more invisible than the servant who cleans up after a storm. Whenever Alpha Rowan suffered his lightning fits, violent surges of power that left his bedroom scorched and the air smelling of burnt ozone, it was Willow who entered the wreckage. She would spend hours on her knees, scrubbing the soot from the obsidian floors and replacing the charred tapestries, all while Rowan sat in the corner, his body still twitching with residual sparks. One rainy Tuesday, the invisible barrier shattered. Rowan had looked at her not as a fixture of the room, but as a person. He had reached out, his fingers still dancing with dangerous electricity, and touched her cheek. To his shock, the lightning didn't burn her. It vanished. Willow was a hollow blood, a vacuum that drank his agony and replaced it with a silence he had never known. From that moment, she became his secret cure. The months that followed were a cruel tapestry of contradictions. In the darkness of his private study, Rowan was a different man. He would pull Willow into his lap, burying his face in the crook of her neck, whispering that she was his anchor and his only peace. He promised her that once the Ascension was over, he would find a way to circumvent the laws of blood. He had given her a small, silver pendant, not a royal relic, but a token of a promise he swore was unbreakable. But in the daylight, Rowan's eyes were made of flint. He would walk past her in the corridors, his shoulder brushing hers without a glance, while he escorted Laurel, the Duchess of the High Peaks. Laurel didn't have Willow's ability to ground him. In fact, her presence only made his power more volatile. But she had the lineage the council demanded. She had the Thunderbond in her veins, even if it was a flickering candle compared to Rowan's sun. The trap was set with the precision of a predator. Laurel, sensing the shift in Rowan's energy and noticing the way his gaze lingered a fraction too long on the kitchen Omega, decided to end the threat. 2 nights before the ceremony, while Willow was serving tea, Laurel discovered a missing royal heirloom, the Star of Stormridge, tucked beneath the thin straw mattress in the servants' quarters. It was a clumsy plant, but for a council looking for a reason to purge the palace of undesirables, it was more than enough. The confrontation took place in the closed chambers of the Elder Council. Rowan sat at the head of the table, the silver pendant he had given Willow hidden in his palm, biting into his skin. The elders were relentless. They spoke of the sanctity of the lightning and the rod of the hollow-blooded. They demanded Willow be made an example of, to prove that Rowan was not being corrupted by lower castes. She is a thief of the crown and a siphoner of your strength, Alpha, the High Elder hissed. If you do not cast her out, the Great Pax will see it as a sign that you are unfit to channel the Thunderbond. Rowan looked at Willow, who stood trembling in the center of the room, her eyes pleading with him to remember the nights they spent in the dark. He looked at the pendant in his hand, then slowly closed his fist, sliding it into his pocket. When he spoke, his voice was the cold crack of a whip. The law must be upheld. I will not let a servant's greed threaten the stability of Stormridge. He chose his image. He chose the throne. He chose the lie. Back in the present, the High Healer is still screaming, his voice a frantic prayer against the growing darkness. He tries to push past the guards, his hands glowing with a desperate, healing light. Alpha, you don't understand. The siphoning, it's not a crime. It's the child's instinct to protect the mother. You cannot send her to the mines in this state. The iron will kill the heir before it can draw its first breath. But Laurel is there, her hand a cold weight on Rowan's shoulder. She leans close, her voice a poisonous honey that only Rowan can hear. Don't be a fool, Rowan. Look at her. An Omega siphoning an Alpha seed? It's a dark magic hoax, a last-ditch effort to keep her claws in you. If you back down now, the Council will see you as a man ruled by a pregnant servant's lies. Send her away. Let the mines deal with the miracle. Rowan's eyes move from the cracks in his palace floor to the woman he once called his anchor. He sees the blood on her temple, the chains on her wrists, and the undeniable surge of power emanating from her womb. For a second, his resolve wavers. He looks as if he might reach out and catch her. Then he remembers the Council. He remembers the Duchess. He remembers the crown. The order stands, Rowan barks, his voice trembling with a fury he's trying to convince himself is righteous. Take the siphoner to the iron mines. If the child is real, the goddess will protect it. If it is a lie, the iron will reveal the truth. The healer collapses in despair as the guards hoist Willow's limp body like a sack of grain. As they drag her toward the heavy obsidian doors, a low rumble shakes the very foundation of the mountain. It isn't thunder. It is the sound of a kingdom's heart breaking. Which is truly the greater evil, Rowan's cowardice in the face of his own heart, or Laurel's calculated, cold-blooded cruelty? Cast your vote in the comments below. The transport to the iron mines was a journey through a nightmare, but the true descent began at the mouth of the abyss. The air at the edge of the dead pit was thick with the dust of crushed nullstone, a substance designed to dampen wolf instincts until the spirit simply withered away. As the guards forced Willow to her knees for the final shackling, a familiar pair of boots stepped into her field of vision. She looked up, hope flickering briefly in her battered eyes, only to find the cold, rigid face of her older brother, Kalen. He was a high-ranking Beta, a man who had built his career on unwavering loyalty to the Stormridge line. In his hands, he held the iron collar, a heavy, jagged ring of anti-magic ore. Kalen, Willow whispered, her voice cracking. Please. You know I didn't steal that relic. You know what Rowan and I... Silence, prisoner, Kalen interrupted. His voice was a flat, rehearsed monotone, but his hands trembled as he knelt to fit the collar around her neck. He avoided her eyes, focusing instead on the heavy bolts he was about to drive home. I'm your sister, she pleaded, a single tear cutting a path through the grime on her face. Our mother's blood runs in me. Don't do this. Kalen leaned in, his lips brushing her ear as he tightened the iron until it bruised her skin. The magic suppressant metal bit into her throat, and she felt her inner wolf howl in sudden, suffocating agony. You've shamed our bloodline for the last time, he hissed, his voice devoid of mercy. I serve the Alpha. I serve the throne. As of this moment, I have no sister. He stood and turned his back, signaling the guards to throw her into the lift. The iron mines were a labyrinth of sensory deprivation. For weeks, Willow lived in a world of rhythmic clinking and suffocating darkness. The nullstone walls acted like a sponge, soaking up her strength, her scent, and her sanity. Her wolf grew quiet, retreating into the deepest recesses of her mind to survive. Yet, in the terrifying silence, a new rhythm took hold. It was the heartbeat of her child, steady, fierce, and strangely unaffected by the iron. It was as if the baby was feeding on the very void that was trying to kill its mother. She was assigned to the deepest level, a place where even the strongest wolves lasted only months. It was here she encountered Aspen Nightshade. Unlike the other hollow-eyed prisoners, Aspen didn't pick at the rock. He spent his hours tracing the silver veins in the stone with his fingertips, his eyes reflecting a sharp, academic light that the mines hadn't managed to dim. "You should stop fighting the iron," Aspen said one evening, his voice startlingly clear in the gloom. "It's a losing battle for a wolf. But for a Stormbreaker, it's a dinner invitation." Willow looked at him, her body thin and trembling. "I'm an Omega. I'm a hollow blood. That's what they call us." Aspen laughed, a dry, melodic sound. "Hollow? No, little wolf. You're a vacuum. They told you that you were a parasite because you drank Rowan's lightning, didn't they? They made you believe you were stealing his power when, in reality, you were the only reason he survived it." He moved closer, pointing to the jagged nullstone walls. "This stone doesn't just kill magic, it grounds it. And so do you. You aren't a parasite, Willow. You are the ground. Without a ground, lightning has nowhere to go but back into the clouds or through the heart of the one who called it. Without you, your precious Alpha is just a man waiting to be struck by his own lightning." Willow felt a strange heat bloom behind her navel. "Then why do I feel so weak?" "Because you've been taught to hold your breath," Aspen whispered. "Stop resisting the void. Reach out. The mine is full of the static energy of the earth. Drink it." Willow closed her eyes. She stopped trying to find her wolf and instead focused on the hollow space within her soul. She thought of the injustice, the iron collar, and the brother who had disowned her. She reached out to the cold stone walls not with her hands, but with her intent. Suddenly, the suffocating pressure of the nullstone shifted. The energy didn't feel like a drain anymore. It felt like a pull. Deep within the rock, the ambient static of the mountain began to flow toward her. It rushed through her fingertips, up her arms, and settled in her womb, where the air greeted it with a silent roar of recognition. For the first time in months, Willow didn't feel like she was dying. She felt like she was waking up. In the dim light of the mine, Aspen watched in awe as Willow's eyes, once a dull, defeated brown, flickered with a sudden, piercing flash of pure white light. The iron collar around her neck groaned, the metal beginning to pit and rust as she siphoned the very substance meant to suppress her. Willow Ravencrest's brother chose his status and his alpha over his own flesh and blood. In a world where pack is everything, do you believe a betrayal like that can ever be forgiven, or is he dead to her forever? While Willow found her strength in the belly of the earth, the heights of Stormridge were burning. The palace, once a monument to Alpha Rowan's glory, had become a gilded cage filled with the smell of scorched stone and terror. Without his ground, Rowan was no longer a king, he was a walking disaster. His lightning, once a precision tool of war, had become an uncontrollable infection. Static jumped from his fingertips to the drapes, igniting fires that no one dared to extinguish. He walked the halls as a ghost, his skin humming with a violent, white-blue glow that made his own guards flinch. Rowan's descent was Laurel's greatest opportunity. She didn't spend her nights comforting the man she had fought to claim. Instead, she retreated to the Solar, meeting with ambassadors from the Ironclaw and Shadowfang packs. "The Alpha is burning out," she told them, her voice devoid of the affection she performed in public. "He is a hollow vessel. When he falls, and he will fall soon, I will need allies to secure the transition. My father's armies are ready, but I need your recognition of my regency." She was already measuring the throne for her own shadow, viewing Rowan as nothing more than a spent battery. Miles away, the iron mines trembled. Willow didn't break out with a roar. She simply walked through the gates. The nullstone, which once suppressed her, had been drained so thoroughly that it crumbled like dry clay beneath her touch. Aspen Nightshade led her toward the Peak of Sorrows, the highest point in the kingdom, where the atmosphere was permanently charged with the mountain's fury. The climb was a brutal test of Willow's newfound resolve. Every step higher into the thin, freezing air felt like a battle against the very elements. A massive storm, the greatest in a century, was rolling in, drawn by the unnatural vacuum Willow had become. "You have to be the conductor," Aspen shouted over the howling wind as they reached the jagged summit. "If you don't call the lightning now, the energy building inside you will shatter your soul. You are a Stormbreaker, Willow. Break the sky before it breaks you." Willow stood at the edge of the precipice, her hair whipping around her face, her eyes glowing with a brilliance that rivaled the stars. She reached out, not with fear, but with an invitation. She felt the mate bond, that thin, silver thread that still connected her to Rowan, and she didn't use it to cry for help. She used it as a straw. In the palace, Rowan was in the middle of a war council when he suddenly fell to his knees, clutching his chest. A silent scream tore from his throat as he felt his power, his very essence, being violently yanked out of his body. It wasn't a slow drain, it was a siphoning so aggressive it felt like his veins were being emptied of blood. On the mountain, Willow threw her head back and screamed as the first bolt of lightning struck her. It didn't char her skin. It didn't stop her heart. The white energy hit her and simply vanished into her. She was a pillar of starlight, a bridge between heaven and earth. With every strike, she felt the baby inside her surge with a primal, alpha strength, drinking the lightning that had once belonged to the father who had discarded them. Rowan collapsed on the cold floor of his throne room, his skin dimming, his eyes fading to a dull, powerless gray. He was a king of nothing, while on the Peak of Sorrows, a sovereign was being born. The heir isn't even in the world yet, and it has already brought a king to his knees and drained a god's power. Tell me in the comments, is this the most powerful child in werewolf history, or is it the mother's vengeance that truly fuels the storm? The throne room of Stormridge had never felt so cold. The obsidian pillars, once humming with power, were silent and scarred by the erratic fires Rowan could no longer control. Alpha Rowan sat on his throne, but he looked like a ghost of the man who had ascended months ago. His skin was sallow, his hands trembling as he held the quill. Laurel stood over him, her eyes burning with a triumphant, predatory light. She was pushing a treaty toward him, a document that would effectively surrender the Stormridge sovereignty to her father's house. "Sign it, Rowan," Laurel whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to the thunder rolling outside. "You have no power left. You are a hollow shell. Let me save what remains of this pack before you burn it all down." Rowan's hand hovered over the parchment. He felt the void in his chest where the lightning used to live, a vacuum that had been growing ever since the day Willow was dragged away. Just as the nib touched the paper, the massive obsidian doors, the doors that had withstood a century of sieges, didn't just break. They vaporized. A shockwave of pure, white energy surged through the hall, turning the air into a shimmering haze of heat and light. Standing in the threshold was Willow. She was no longer the soot-covered Omega in rags. She wore a gown of woven silver that seemed to hold the storm itself, her hair a halo of crackling electricity. Behind her stood Aspen Nightshade, but he was not needed. The guards, the council members, and the highborn wolves who had mocked her all hit the floor, their bodies reacting instinctively to a power that far surpassed any alpha they had ever known. Willow strode down the center aisle, each footstep leaving a faint, glowing mark on the stone. She didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes, now a brilliant, celestial white, were fixed on the throne. "The ceremony is over, Rowan," she said, her voice a low vibration that made the windows rattle in their frames. Laurel shrieked, drawing a silver dagger from her belt. "Guards, kill this rogue. She is a thief of the crown." But the guards didn't move. They couldn't. Willow raised a hand, and the silver dagger in Laurel's grip turned to white-hot liquid, dripping onto the floor like tears. Rowan struggled to his feet, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Willow, what have you become?" "I became what you were too afraid to be," she replied. "I became the ground that the storm deserves." With a sudden, violent surge of energy, Willow shifted. It wasn't the bone-cracking, bloody transformation of a common wolf. It was an explosion of light. In her place stood a massive wolf of translucent silver energy, her fur made of flickering starlight. This was the primal alpha form, the Storm-Breaker of legend. She lunged, not to bite, but to claim. As she passed through Rowan, the last remnants of his flickering lightning were pulled into her mass, leaving him completely, utterly human. Willow shifted back, standing before the broken king. Rowan collapsed onto the steps of his own throne, clutching his chest. He was finally silent. No sparks, no humming, just the sound of a man realize he had traded his soul for a chair. Laurel scrambled backward, her face a mask of horror. You can't do this." The laws of blood. The laws of blood were written by men who feared the ground they walked on, Willow interrupted, her voice echoing with the authority of the storm. She looked down at Rowan, who was weeping now not from pain, but from the crushing weight of his own cowardice. "I came here to kill you," Willow said softly, the white light in her eyes softening just enough to show the woman beneath the goddess. "I spent nights in the iron mines imagining your heart stopping as mine almost did. But looking at you now, I realize the crown is just metal. The throne is just stone. You sacrificed everything for things that have no heartbeat." She leaned in, her voice a whisper that only he could hear. "I won't kill you, Rowan. I'll let you live. I'll let you spend every day of your long, powerless life watching me raise our son in a kingdom that no longer fears the lightning. You will be a guest in a house you once thought you owned." The justice that followed was swift and absolute. Laurel was stripped of her titles and exiled to the very borderlands she had tried to annex, sentenced to serve as a nameless laborer. Willow's brother, Kalen, was brought before her in chains. He didn't ask for mercy. He knew he didn't deserve it. Willow didn't exile him. Instead, she stripped him of his beta rank and sentenced him to the iron mines, not as a prisoner, but as a guard for the new sanctuary she was building there. He would spend the rest of his life protecting the Omegas he had once looked down upon. The iron mines were officially closed as a place of punishment and reopened as the sanctuary of the ground, a place where outcasts and hollowbloods could learn to harness the Earth's energy. The final image of the Storm Ridge era wasn't a coronation of fire, but a celebration of rain. Willow stood on the high balcony, the heavy silver crown resting lightly on her head. In her arms, she held her newborn son. As the infant let out a soft cry, the violent, jagged lightning that had plagued the kingdom for centuries vanished. In its place, a gentle, rolling thunderstorm moved across the valley. It brought no fires, no fear. It only brought the rain that the parched, scorched earth had been waiting for since the world began. Willow looked out over her people, not as a mate, not as a parasite, but as the sovereign who had broken the storm to save the land.